Bartenders of Reddit, what's that one ducked up story you can't stop thinking? Busy full bar, 10 p.m. and picking up. Girl walks up to an open spot at the bar, obviously just arrived and carded by security. Puts her ID away and gets out her credit card. She orders a pitcher of the cheapest beer I have. Doesn't care what it is, doesn't want a tab, just pays and tips. I ask her how many glasses she wants. She says none. Weird. She just got here, so I know she doesn't have glassware yet. Is she just going to drink from the pitcher? Got my answer pretty quickly. She calmly put her purse back together and over her shoulder, picked up the pitcher, walked behind a couple sitting about 10 feet down the bar, and poured the entire pitcher of cheap beer on the man's head. Called him a cheating a hole and walked out. Calm, composed, and savage. Story 2. Woman storms in to find her boyfriend sharing an intimate drink with the woman he's obviously cheating on her with. After loudly chewing him out for a couple of minutes, she finishes with the killer line, addressed at the woman. Next time we'll do BJ. Remember, it's been inside of me. I honestly had to restrain myself from breaking into applause. Story 3. One night during a graveyard shift at a dive bar, this guy walks in. He was well-dressed and sober, not the type I normally got at 2 in the morning. I fixed his drink and opened his tab, but instead of going back to my book, I just watched him, thinking about what his story could be. 2 drinks later, he told me. He had a fight with his fiancée one night, and she stormed out. She got into a car accident and died. It was the first anniversary of her death, and he was scared to be alone that night. So he came to me. I said duck it, and we proceeded to get hammered on my boss's dime. Don't feel bad. I'm fairly sure it was a front for money laundering. When my shift ended, I poured him into a cab and sent him home. 2 days later, I got to work, and there was an envelope with my name on it. He wrote me a beautiful thank you note and included $500 in cash. Story 4. Sunday closing shift. Huge family party is the last table in the place. 2 servers and me. They bring the bill, and whoever organized the dinner apparently drops on the family that they are all going Dutch. It begins as an argument about money and turns into a brawl. We were a seafood restaurant bar, and someone took a plastic fish off the wall and used it as a weapon. They finally paid the bill with like 8 cards. Luckily, it was an automatic tip on the bill. Story 5. I used to bartend in the financial district of San Francisco. We would occasionally get some high-roller clients, including celebrities. One night, a voice says, "You got gin and tonics back there?" I look up and see Jack Nicholson, wearing sunglasses near midnight, and my jaw drops. He leans in and says, "Well, son, are you going to make me one, or do I need to go back there and make it myself?" I made the fastest G&T of my life and said, "Here you go, sir," to which he replied simply with a double eyebrow raise. In the end, the other older guy picked up the tab and tipped me $300 on a $40 tab. Story 6. I had a woman come in all flirty, but talking about the rich married doctor she is dating. Early afternoon, so only one in the bar for about 30 minutes. Talked the whole time. She was cute. After 30 minutes, a couple comes in, and while I'm getting their order and talking to them, she starts calling me back over. I told her to hang on a minute, and she gets up and starts walking to the bathroom with her drink. It was the second one I'd given her, and it was full, but she suddenly was walking like she was overserved. I let my manager know to keep an eye out for her because she might be drunk. About 30 minutes later, I realized she wasn't back and asked someone to check on her in the bathroom. She had broken her glass and slit her wrists. We called 911 and they were able to save her. When they wheeled her out on the stretcher, I was giving the police a statement, and they wheeled her right past me. She looked me right in the eyes and just shrugged. Messed me up for about a month. Story 7. Regular walks into the pub. "You're barred," says I. "What for?" "You stole another customer's mixed grill last night when you were drunk." "Oh. I was wondering what those sausages were doing in my pocket." Story 8. I used to bartend at a wedding venue, and during the reception of an afternoon wedding. The groom kept coming up and buying rounds of drinks, but never with the bride. He was tipping appropriately, but as he got drunker, he was being more and more generous, telling me to keep the change as he paid with $50 and eventually $100. Come to find out, he was grabbing cash out of cards. I eventually cut him off, but I have to imagine he kept getting fed drinks. As he was carried out, I finally got my first glimpse of the very pregnant and equally upset bride. I offered to give her back the close to $500 I'd been tipped by him alone, but she very graciously told me to keep it and said not to worry about it, and he's going to pay for it for a long time. Story 9. I was a tour guide at a distillery. After the tour, I'd go back to bartending. One guy on my tour came up to the bar and immediately said, "I can tell you're on the spectrum because I also have autism." Very casually. I have never been tested for it, and my doctors have never even hinted about it. That was like a year ago, and I still think about it. I wasn't offended, and I understand autism. It was just shocking. Story 10. Irish. Working in an Irish bar in Europe. Super stereotypical, boozed-up English stag do make the bar their base for a few days. Obnoxious, loudish, boorish each time they came in. Deserved to have been kicked out. But the manager forbid it as they were spending loads. Each night, they'd act like then head off to the red light district. After 3 days of this, with a smattering of anti-Irish comments, They're again leaving to inflict themselves on some other poor soul. They're gathering their stuff. The stag come out of the toilet, leans in, and tells the group something. They're raucous, laughing and delighted with what he's told them, and storm off to the toilet en masse. Come out pissing themselves and eventually leave. Myself and a colleague have to go in to see what they've done. The guy had taken a crap. The kind of crap you do after 3 days of heavy drinking. Each time he's wiped his arse, he had stuck the toilet paper to the wall. He'd practically wallpapered one side of the cubicle. Hours were spent trying to get the place back to normal. Horrendous. Next day, they rocked back up to the bar expecting to be served. Were shocked that they weren't let in, as if the 800 years weren't bad enough. Story 11. Worked closing bar shift most. Refused to serve one of my regulars one day because he looked pale and yellowish. I was genuinely concerned I would be serving his last drink. Long story short, he passed a few days later. Story 12. Bartender. For many years. I've seen all the usual stuff. Sex in the bathroom, vomit all over the dance floor, fighting. But the story that sticks with me, and the one I retell the most, is about a girl who got absolutely puke drunk and ends up in the bathroom, sitting on the floor with her pants around her ankles. I call a cab, this was back in the day, and when it finally arrived, I'm trying to get this chick off the floor and get her pants up, along with help from a friend of hers. She says, "Just need another minute to get some water," and proceeds to use her hand as a ladle for toilet water. I started laughing so hard while still trying to get her to stop, and she came in the next Tuesday and looked me in the eye like nothing happened. Story 13. The pukening. Worked for a guy that would get aggressive if you cut people off. Group of ladies comes in more than tipsy from bottomless brunch and orders a round of tequila rose shots and Long Island iced tea. One lady downs 2 shots, and her Long Island then goes suspiciously quiet. A minute later, she throws up on herself and her friends and keeps throwing up. I run for a bin bag and ended up standing there holding this lady's hair while she's sick in a bin bag and her friends are trying to call someone. Meanwhile, the owner is standing there yelling at me. Had to work the rest of the shift, smelling vaguely of sick. I didn't quit, but I did report him to both the tax man and the licensing. Shortly after that, we got a new owner. Story 14. Thursday afternoon, 2:30-ish. I'm doing normal afternoon crap and things go from 0 to 100 in the dining room. Bar was on one side of the room. Dining room opened up straight ahead. A family had went to pick up their 22-year-old son from jail. His girlfriend got him high in the car with fentanyl-laced whatever they were doing. He started seizing at the table. He pretty much died in the dining room. They pulled the plug a couple days after. Story 15. 2 of us working watched this couple walk up to the other bartender. The person ordering was phenomenally hot. The partner is giving the bartender a sign to cut them off with a silent wave to the throat. Bartender is enamored with phenomenally beautiful customer and sees it as an opportunity to hit on them. Bartender tells their partner, it's not their place to determine what's best for them, says you seem controlling and pretty insecure, has a laugh with the hottest, and takes a shot with them. 2 seconds later, it looked like Mexican food and corn dogs, and it was all over the bar, the bartender, it was everywhere. It was an absolute disaster. Story 16. Nothing too mad. A woman comes in and orders a cider, and says she's my boss's girlfriend. She has a prolonged disagreement with him over the course of my shift, during which I keep giving her drinks. Because I don't want to provoke her, or my boss. At one point, my boss says to me, she's not my girlfriend. Ask her to pay for her drinks. She ends up yelling at him and throws menus on the floor, and he puts her in a cab. Another time, a woman craps herself and puts her pants in the toilet bin. When I went to lock that cubicle, I got the wrong one. So for at least an hour, loads of customers were using the cubicle with the crafty pants in it. One night, a guy smashed up the disabled cubicle. Boss wouldn't let him leave, but he got out eventually before police arrived. One of the chefs gets in the police car, and they drive around the area and find him, and he gets arrested. This was on a first date, and the poor woman was aghast at how things went, poor lass. It was a pretty nice bar, so we didn't get much. Story 17. In 2023 to 2024, I worked in a cafe in a small provincial airport. For a long time, I worked at the bar spot, one of the 3 where, in addition to coffee and food, there was alcohol. Throughout the time that I worked there, soldiers were constantly returning home through our airport. A lot of people have condemned me for these words, but these guys were, most of them, such a holes. I don't know how many former prisoners and just psychopaths returned through us or to our city, but of all those who visited my point, there were 20 kind and polite people. They didn't drink at all. They weren't rude. They helped passengers with bags, even if they had a look at 2,000 yards and they seemed to have recently lost 30 kilograms of their weight. And these stories were the most interesting. 1. Our owner's favorite activity was to arrive in the middle of the working day and check if everything was in order in his cafe, and he was very angry if he saw that people were taking seats in the cafe and not buying anything and demanded that we kick them out. The most fun part was kicking out these soldiers who got drunk at the previous airport and were just sleeping at tables or the bar. It's not worth describing how many times I managed to do it calmly, and how many times I called the police and was understandable One of them did not sleep, but molested the passengers and yelled at the entire airport, and when they tried to kick him out, he shouted something like, "You're talking to a veteran, idiot, don't touch me, I do what I want," until he saw the police. 2. One of the soldiers was drunk AF, spent 5 minutes trying to explain what he wanted to order, got really angry and started yelling at me, ordered champagne, it was before the new year, pancakes, drank champagne and ran away. Thanks to the guy for lunch. 3. Another soldier came to me and started arguing about my vodka pouring skill, tried to take the bottle and glass to show me how to do it correctly. And then another drunk got to him. They started arguing right next to the counter and created a queue, and didn't even listen to me when I told them to sit at a table. If it wasn't for the wife of one of them, it would have lasted forever. 4. One man walked around the airport, hesitated to approach anyone for a long time, and then asked me for help. I thought he was going to ask me to pour him a drink, but, in short, he spent the entire payment. At another airport, he spent the money he borrowed from a friend. And then he realized that he didn't have enough to get home. He wanted me to call his sister. She wouldn't pick up the phone if he called from his phone. Ask her to send me money and give it to him. For some reason, the ATM wouldn't accept his card. I called his sister, told her everything, and got only a, "Damn, let me talk to him," after which she yelled at him for a while, but she sent the money. The dude looked so pathetic that I stopped drinking alcohol after this story. Stories that doesn't apply to soldiers. A group of historians flew to a conference in China. There was a flight delay that day, and I must say these were my best clients. They left me a lot of money. And it was also interesting to discuss with them the images of the dragon in various mythologies. Some strange drunk lady was waiting for her husband from the war. She asked why no one was there. We had almost no flights in afternoon and the airport was empty. At the same time, we were on our lunch break. When I replied that everyone was at lunch, she said the strangest phrase that I had heard, "And I'm not afraid of dinners or treats." She spent a long time telling her biography. There was a coffee machine next to me where coffee was cheaper but worse, and dude who serviced this machine offered me to buy his coffee for cheap and sell the one we used. He was doing this while our owner was standing nearby, and while he was being recorded by 3 security cameras at the same time. At any airport, there are local taxi drivers who always work only at the airport and return back. These men were kind of nice, but only for their friends. One day, another taxi driver arrived at our place. A very smart dude who was researching numerology, tarot, the meaning of names, and was good with accounting. He was clearly an ex-convict. He didn't cover the tattoos on the back of his head. But he was the most polite and intelligent of all taxi drivers. But still, there was something about him that made me uncanny. When the locals saw this guy, they told me, "We'll deal with him," and I never saw him after that. Story 18. We had a regular named Louis. One night, he orders his usual 2 or 3 drinks and pays his tab. He's almost like Norm from Cheers. So when he leaves, everyone says, "Bye, Louis." That's when he collapses and hits the door with his head. Paramedics and staff are eventually helping him. And then he just pushes off the paramedic and hops out of the ambulance before leaving screeching his tires. The manager on duty was this weasel of a man. Middle-aged and married, but used to be real friendly with the female employees and acted like he was this wholesome Christian married guy. So everyone thought it was harmless. He eventually cheated on his wife with a female employee, but at a different bar years later also, we found out he had lost his previous job for wearing a kilt and flashing his banana on camera multiple times. Well, this manager was new to our franchise location, and the one he came from was a newer but poorly ran location. Their staff wasn't trained properly, and they sucked compared to us. Also, they did about a quarter of the business we did, but they had this nose-up superiority thing, and they considered us the ghetto store. So their store closes down because it's slow, and he got transferred to our store. He's basically at the bottom of the managerial totem pole, and he keeps trying to bring his old bartenders in and push our current team out. I was the head bartender, and he was constantly trying to find a way to get rid of me. It was getting tough for him because I had been with the company for years and was a corporate trainer, so I did everything by the book. He had a weird thing with the lesbian head bartender from his old store, so he wanted to get her to replace me. He was also just all around a little smarmy weasel and wasn't respected by other managers. Quick context. When the bartenders and I started there around a year before this, our store was the slow one while theirs was busy, but we turned it around with great service and doing everything the way corporate instructed. His store took shortcuts, and they were lazy. Eventually, they lost regulars while we were gaining new ones consistently. Our place became a neighborhood bar, basically. Everyone knew each other, and most had spots they sat at every day. It was neat. So when Louis collapses that night, the manager does zero investigating and fires me, the head bartender, and the 3 others working on the spot. Instead of looking into the situation, he was busy calling up his old staff about the job opening he thought he was about to create. So we're still working about an hour after the Louis incident when these 3 guys come in wearing uniform. And we all knew each other, so it didn't take long to put 2 and 2 together. The bar top is full, and the regulars catch on to what's going on, so after Homeboy thinks he fired us, we're all just outside smoking a cig trying to figure out what EF just happened. and literally the entire bar empties out. The regulars are out there with us asking where we want to go drink and that wherever we go, work will be their new spot. The general manager calls me from his hunting blind about an hour later and says, "Don't worry, just look at it as a night off. I'll add $200 to each of your checks and come back on time for your next shift." We were all next door on the patio at Buffalo Wild Wings with the regulars and could see our restaurant completely empty, except for dining room guests, and the bar top was still dirty from our guests that left. After it was all said and done, the manager was demoted and eventually sent to another store. We kept our jobs and he apologized, although none of us shook his hand. He had a smirk while asking for us to forgive him. Corporate looked into it and watched everything on camera. It turned out Louis had only finished one drink that night. He gave his other one to Homer before bouncing. When Louis came back a few weeks later, we threw him a little party, but he didn't drink for a week or two. Turns out he had a stroke at some point that night, and that's what led to his collapse and why the manager thought he was hammered. Also, it wasn't a well-kept secret that even though he was well-dressed and out-together old man, he was also a heavy recreational CK user, as opposed to those competitive CK users. After the stroke, he said stop doing coke. He didn't remember pushing the EMTs, but we learned when he screeched his tires that night. He then drove himself about an hour to his hometown and went to the hospital there. The whole thing was a trip. Story 19. A woman was hitting, I think in 2018, and she met up with the guy that hit her at my work. I was working the day they went in. I couldn't even recall them walking in at all. A few days later, found out she was hit in her hotel room. Guy got life in prison. Another constant one is a guy obviously hires escorts generously and brings them into my work sometimes. I've maybe seen a couple hundred different women come in with him over the years. He's even in our Ducking Chef's recipes book because he's a regular. He told me he had a wife and kids. He's old and fat and wrinkly. He just likes to have fun like when he was young. He's tried to chat up female workers over the years, innocently but provocatively, never done anything to raise alarms. Yeah, a bit of a banana head. Not alarming. But we had to turn away Benedict Cumberbatch because we were super busy. I still remember how sad he was because we're quite a popular restaurant for great but casual food and dining. Story 20. I have so many, but 3 really stand out. 1. Halloween, working at a very popular pizza restaurant, which became more of a college kid drink spot after dinner service in a medium-sized college town in West TX. It's towards the end of dinner service and right before the bar really transitioned into a pre-game spot. There's a large group of very kind Mexican mothers and children who have obviously just wrapped up. They're trick-or-treating for the night and are having pizza. A group of sorority girls walk in and wants a table. There are no tables available, and one very vocal member of the sorority girls starts letting some racist comments fly. I firmly tell her to shut the hell up and please stop harassing these women while they are enjoying their dinner. Her response? She walks to the bathroom, pulls out her tampon and smooshes it into the adobe walls. An off-the-clock server was washing her hands and witnessed the whole thing. 2. Same TX bar, a group of 3 people, a gay couple and a girl, come in on a slow night. Only the couple order drinks. I serve them, turn around to do some cleaning side work. And when I turn back around, the girl has emptied her water glass and is pouring a pint of wine from a box of wine she has set on top of the bar. I obviously kick her out, and her friends apologize profusely and tip me very well with the explanation that they told her not to. But she's going through a hard time. I forget about the situation. 2 days later, the girl's, who I might add was 35, which I know because I had carded her, mother calls the bar and complains about the treatment of her daughter and how I embarrassed her in front of her friends. I explain calmly that it is wildly illegal for someone to bring their own box of wine to a drinking establishment and my job would be at risk had I allowed her to continue. To which her mother replied that their family was from New Orleans and her daughter didn't know any better. Unfortunately for this mother, I happened at the time to have a seasonal job as a craft bartender at a small boutique bar in the French Quarter during the Mardi Gras Jazz Fest season. So I informed her that while it is legal to bring a to-go drink from another establishment into a bar in New Orleans, it is still very much frowned upon to bring one's own box of booze. 3. The best for last, an assistant basketball coach for a large Essex school, whipping it out and getting to business on himself at a Marriott hotel lobby bar while I was trying to close for the evening and then proceeding to be very confused when I threatened to call the police. He was wasted from some other event in town. I had only served him water when he showed up 20 mins before last call. Story 21. Not really of asterisk act up, but I think about it a lot. It was the afternoon shift, so only one bartender and one cook worked. I'm behind the bar and a man comes. He says he doesn't have any money and if I could spot him a coffee. I'm young, 18 at the time. I refused and he left. A few weeks later, I dropped a CD while driving and reached down to pick it up. Well, I came up on a curve and ended up in the ditch. My car's front end is in the ditch and trunk is in the road. A car stops, and the man who came in for coffee gets out. He says, "We better get this car out of the ditch before a cop sees you." He proceeds to get the car out of the ditch and facing the right way. IDK. But to me, that was God teaching me a big lesson that day. It doesn't take much to be kind to those in need. Story 22. It's not as ducked up as some, but it was not the norm in the bar that I worked at. I lived in London and was working at a big, posh concert venue. It usually hosted ballet companies, opera companies, and other things of that ilk, but would occasionally do pop and chart music concerts. My job there was theater bar service, get the punters their pre-show drinks and snacks, clean up during the first act, sort out interval drinks for those who had pre-booked them, and then do the interval bar service. Not a horrible job mostly. The opera and ballet crowd were snobby and could be rude, but mostly that was water off a duck's back. What sucked was the beady eye gig. We had wannabe Liam Gallaghers pouring in the door, yelling and shoving, making gross comments and trying to get any female bartender's number. They were rude, bad-tempered, and would not stop drinking. It was a scrum at the bar. I had several men old enough to be my father flirting with me and trying to get my number because, and I quote, "You're the only fit bird at the bar." I told so many gross, sweaty men that I was not allowed to give out my phone number that evening. It wasn't normal theater service either. It was just a free-for-all at the bar, and at one point, we ran out of cider. Oh God. The abuse we got for running out of cider. When there was a full bar literally a few steps away that did it on draft, which I'd told them about multiple times, stupid duckers. I remember at one point a fight broke out somewhere in between our bar and the corridor. They'd hired extra security, and those guys had it rough that night. Stupid screaming man who wouldn't be told no kept being dragged out past our bar. I remember getting told I could go on my break and flatly refusing because I would have to walk through crowds of gropey men to get to the break room. No thanks. Would rather sit in the tiny supply cupboard. I didn't even get the worst of it. That was the Champagne bar on the next floor up. The BDI fans were intent on drinking the entire venue dry, including anything they could physically get their hands on that was off limits. There was a Methuselah of what I think was Moe at the back of that bar. Empty, just for decoration, but one of the duckers thought it was real. In his drunken idiocy, he vaulted the bar and tried to grab it, assuming nobody would stop him. He got tackled by 4 security guards and dragged out of there apparently, according to my friend who worked up. Eventually, the call was made to cut everyone off and start packing up the bars, since these arseholes would not stop drinking even when warned by security staff. Apparently, they'd brought their own beer in too, so security was busy confiscating that. It was a mess. I remember that evening my till being up because I'm a northerner, but 0 tips given. I waited that night for ages before leaving the bar, as there were still rowdy, drunk, creepy men hanging around well after the gig was over trying to pick up the bar staff. A lot of us were students, so it was all these gross 40-odd-year-old men and older trying to pick up 18 and 19-year-olds. I remember being asked if I wanted to work on the artist's bar that night, and I flatly refused that as well. There was no way I was going to. I worked on the artist's bar semi-regularly, since I was polite and trustworthy, but there was no way I was subjecting myself to any more creepy behavior. Sounds like a regular night for some, but for a 19-year-old ballet student trying to make some extra money, it was a shock as to how entitled some men can be. I had my eyes on a swivel all the way home that night. Story 23? Right before last call, I had a very drunk female regular who was basically passing out at the bar, literally head down on the wood. She'd come in from a different bar, looking for one more for last call at her local, because she lived across the street. Obviously, we didn't serve her, but she was friendly with staff, so we let her put her head down while we cleaned up last call, and then one of our servers who was close with her was going to walk her home. While we were cleaning up and cashing out, running out the clock until we pulled last call off the tables, this random guy come off the street and seeing her alone in the bar beelines right to her and is immediately all over her, arms around her, whispering in her ear, getting real handsy. Guy didn't even try to order a drink because it was clear that wasn't what he was looking for. Right away, we were wise to him and told him to gee it fo. The guy got all indignant and started arguing with us, but not because he felt we were misjudging him, but because he was outraged that we were trying to take her for ourselves, as he had seen her first. Ended up physically dragging him out of the bar. The blacked-out regular didn't even notice. It was a shocking eye-opener to me how brazen abuse culture could be in the bar business and how unsafe it could be out there. For a woman just minding her own business, but in a vulnerable situation. Made me wonder how many times similar situations played out with different results because the victim wasn't lucky enough to be surrounded by friends when they were at their most vulnerable. Also brought home to me that there are people out there that are active predators searching for vulnerable people to prey on. Story 24. Guy in his 40s. Gregarious social drinker, a regular. He had cancer and his wife left him in the same year. His personality completely changed. He went from 2 or 3 drinks at most to a raging alcoholic. Finally, we had to kick him out. We can't serve in my state if we think they're intoxicated, even if that means 2 drink to drive as opposed to dangerously drunk. People bend the rules, but he was far gone, and it would have been irresponsible not to cut him off. He started screaming at me. I'm 110 pounds, 5 feet 2 inches. Never heard the guy swear before, but he called me about 8 times in a minute. Very glad my boss, who's twice my size, was there to get it under control. Never saw him again. That was a hard ban. 2 years later, I heard this guy was dead of cirrhosis. Good money for that age and a great boss, but a terrible job. Story 25. I have bartended part-time for years. I had a server who had gotten off after the kitchen closed and had a few too many shift drinks. After the bar closed, she said that she was going to go into the kitchen to make something to eat. No big deal. We do this all of the time. After a few minutes, I hear screaming and dash to the kitchen. She had knelt down to turn on one of the fryers, and in her drunken stupor, had instead turned the valve to drain the oil from the fryer. It proceeded to shoot out at her, covering her in the kitchen floor in used fryer oil. She had tried to turn it off, but slipped, so by the time I got to the kitchen, she was swimming in a pool of oil. Thankfully, it was cold, or it would have been really bad. We made her climb into the dish pit, as the drain has a grease trap, and sprayed her off the best we could. We then wrapped her like a mummy in bar rags, and threw her into one of the security guard's cars for him to take her home. She still ruined the passenger seat of his car. It was awesome having to clean all of that up at like 3 a.m. after a super busy bar shift. Story 26. She was a regular. She regularly picked up dudes at the bar. One night, my barback and I watched her seduce a dude who was married. Literally watched him call his wife saying he was going to crash at one of his buddies' house. Then we watched him take his ring off of his left hand and put it in his pocket. I was single at the time, but that was so ducked. My barback is married. Once those two walked out of the bar, he told me he needed to call his wife to tell her he loved her. That was 12 years ago, and yeah, man, that really hasn't left my mind since. Story 27. I have quite a few ducked up ones, but I like this goofy one the best. A guy with a full-on permed pompadour comes up to the bar with a grease-stained brown paper bag and said that the food he picked up wasn't cooked properly, and he wants a refund. I look in the bag and know it's not from our place, and I tell him he must be mistaken. He tells me he is a police officer, and I should really reconsider. The thing is, I worked at a cop bar. It was owned by a cop family, and detectives and off-duty police hung out there often. One of the detectives, who is a main character in less funny stories, turns to the guy and says, "Oh yeah, which precinct?" As he casually pulls aside his jacket so his badge is visible, Pompadour's eyes widen and he immediately starts running towards the door just as two more deets are walking in. The only way I can describe what happens next is if you can imagine a Charlie Chaplin-esque Keystone Cops routine. 3 detectives chasing this guy around the bar who is tipping over tables, jumping over them, sliding under them. The works. They finally get a hold of him and he yells out, "I'm under cover!" as they are dragging him out. Story 28. Large group comes into a small bar. Bar has a 2-eye stove. Group is filled with morbidly obese people. Server tells the group they only have 2 eyes on the stove, so some of the food will come out before the others. They say they all want their food at the same time. Server suggests they try Shoney's because the food ain't coming out at the same time, without of it being cold. They insist. Server just shrugs and says, "Okay." About an hour later, he starts bringing out food. There's no warmer because the place is small. He starts putting the plates on the table, and of course they all start complaining their food is cold. He just sighs and says, "Look, I told you from the start we only have 2-eyed stove. I explained if you wanted your food hot, some people were going to get theirs before the others. You insisted it all be brought out at the same time. I don't really know what you expected. I try to set realistic expectations and suggested you try Shoney's if you wanted your food hot at the same time." The group ended up leaving him a penny as a tip for 18 people. The area was a wreck because they controlled their kids about, as well as they controlled their diets. We knew the place was closing, and he didn't care. He grabbed the penny, followed them out into the parking lot, and flipped the penny at them with his thumb and middle finger. Smacked a lady in the back of the head. Couldn't really hear the exchange, but I could by their reaction it wasn't kind. Guy walked back into the restaurant, looked at the owners and said, "Damn this crap. I'm out." They tried to get me to clean his area, and I just laughed and said, no sir. I ended up walking out when they insisted. Place closed the next day. Story 29. I used to bartend at a crafty little place in Albuquerque, and on Thursdays we'd have women's nights. After like 5 p.m. or whatever, the bouncer would only let in women. The rowdy crap they'd get up to was way different from just a bunch of drunk guys, and I hated Thursday nights. Without fail, there would always be a physical altercation, either between patrons or against a staff member for 86ing them for being too wasted. One time when I cut a woman off, she very politely said, "Oh, I guess I have had enough. Haha, thank you." She walked away. Then when I wasn't looking, she ran up and power slapped me as hard as she could. She went to jail for that one. But the absolute craziest crap was the pepper spray incident. At one point during the night, a couple women ran up and complained about their asses burning. It turns out someone had likely sprayed pepper spray on the toilet seats in the women's bathroom. We couldn't prove it, but I could smell it in the air when I went to investigate. There was also a very slight reddish oily substance left on the toilet seat. Story 30. I used to work in a country pub, UK-based. before they all became gastropub. We had a bar, lounge, and restaurant areas. The bar area was a proper old-school bar full of locals, mainly old men who 99% were regulars. They would come in when we opened the doors at 11, filter in and out all day. We had one guy who used to come in a few times a week, beer drinker normally, but definitely an alcoholic, as were most of them. One day, we were running a promotion on Jameson. Buy 4, get 1 free type thing, stamping a loyalty card. So he's moved from beer to Jameson's, happily plowing through neat short after neat short. I'd say that day he went through at least a bottle and a half, if not more. He went home that night, fell over, cracked his head on the sink, and passed. We should have stopped serving him way before he got to that point, but in those days, the landlord didn't really care about that stuff as long as the regulars were happy. In fact, the evening regulars were known for coming in, having 5 or 6 pints, and driving home. Still think about it occasionally. Story 31. Obligatory. Not a bartender story. But my dad was a police officer for 15 years. One night in 85 or 86, he and his partner were called to a bar to assist 2 other officers. 2 drunk women got into a fight, and the other officers could not subdue the women by themselves. These women were kicking, biting, punching, and throwing any glass object they could find at one another and at the bartender, who was trying to get them to settle down. All the male patrons were standing on the farthest side of the bar, just sipping their beers and waiting for their chance to sit at their favorite stools again. But they did not want to get involved. To make a long story short, my dad and his partner and the 2 other officers were able to carry both women out of the bar. But one of the women bit my dad twice, and the other officer was carrying her once. My dad and the other officer had to go down to the basement floor of the police station and get a blood test for AIDS, because both women were known sex workers. The results took 2 weeks. And while my dad tried to carry on like normal over those 2 weeks, he was definitely quieter and more distracted than usual. I could only imagine all of the things going through his head at that time. Doctors were still finding out about HIV, AIDS, so the news at the time was extremely dire. Not the best story, but it is the one I have. Story 32. Guy was on a Tinder date at my bar. The girl was actually a high school classmate of his. They hadn't spoken in years, but they knew each other. After 2 hours of drinks and food, he went to the bathroom, leaving his phone, wallet, keys in his jacket pocket, deed over the chair. She immediately found them and booked it out the door. She then stole his BMW and went on a shopping spree, and the schmuck at the bar. He lamented for an hour that it must have been an emergency. She's going to come back. Before I forced him to call the cops and file a report, because at that point, he couldn't pay his $200 tab either. I often think about him 5 years later. Story 33. Years ago in Chesapeake, bar fight breaks out on our deck patio. I jump over the bar, woman gets knocked down. Help her to her feet, she lunges at the person who hit her. I'm holding her back with our security. She thrashes, then biting the F out of me. Finally, let's go, but seriously, who bites someone? Cops come. I tell them we won't make trouble if she won't make trouble. Except she's wasted and talks a bunch of crap to the cops. Cop looks at me and goes, "She breaks skin?" "Yes, sir." "Awesome, that's a felony. Let's go, ma'am." I wind up at the hospital at 4 a.m. for a tetanus shot. Also, wind up on a victims list, where they're calling asking if I need counseling for my trauma before her court date. They ask me to go to court. Judge makes her go out to her car, write me a check for medical expenses, and sentences her to a week in jail. Story 34. One night, the Harlem Globetrotters showed up an hour before closing, and I made my rent in an hour. It was the last day of the month. I'd picked up a double because I had my wallet stolen a few days prior, giving a ride home to a stranger after playing basketball in the hood. Story 35. I once got in a fight with a guy at the bar while I was working. He was a regular and a huge hole, and I was having a bad day, and he really set me off somehow. Then a guy who he was with, one of the male leads from the movie Across the Universe, grabbed me by the collar with both hands and screamed at me about how I don't belong there. Like an I should be following my dreams kind of pep talk, scream. I don't know why, but it really resonated. I left shortly after that, and the next 4 years was literally all awesome adventure. I'm sure he doesn't remember, and I'm not even sure it was meant in the way that I took it, but I think about it often. Story 36. So, obviously this happened way before I was born and didn't happen to anyone I know, but it's the most ducked up stories I've ever heard about a bar. These guys who owned a speakeasy decided to try to pull off an insurance scam by finding a homeless alcoholic and trying to hit him. The first attempt was by offering him a lifetime of free drinks at their speakeasy, thinking they could make him drink himself to death. But this failed. They tried 4 more times with progressively more and more insane methods of hitting him. But each time he not only miraculously recovered quickly, but would come right back to the speakeasy looking for more free booze. It wasn't until they made extra sure on the 5th attempt, after they had already lost more than the payout would have been, that they finally succeeded. Story 37. I was a bartender in Montreal in 2009. Jay Barackle came in with Sarah Polly, Seth Rogen, and 2 English brothers. Well-dressed older English guy gets rip-roaring drunk, gets belligerent, threatens to hit the female waitstaff, and throws an empty tumbler at her after she cuts him off and has to be restrained by his brother and Seth. They get him out the door. The brothers start fighting in the street because the older guy gets mad at younger brother restraining him. You brother handles him to the ground and, out of frustration, knees him right in the head, and Seth kicks him in the ribs. Younger brother pushes Seth and starts threatening him. Older brother gets up and falls back down. Gets up one more time, dusts himself off, asks his brother if he's good, and then walks off arm in arm with brother. Story 38. One place I worked had a massive high top with one side against the wall with a bench and another facing the front window. I had a clear line of sight from the bar and saw a woman very casually get under the table and give her man head. I laughed, and by the time the manager went over, she had mounted him right then and there with a full restaurant. Another busy spot I worked at turned into a big college bar late night with dancing and such. There was a massive brawl and a lot of broken glass. Yet the manager refused to shut down that floor to clean. 30 minutes later, a girl slips while dancing and cuts her femoral artery on a broken glass on the ground. My coworker was a veteran and saved her life by sticking his hand in her leg and pinching the artery. Had he not done that, she surely would have passed. Sure enough, the manager closed after that, and then the bar got sued by the girl and won. Story 39. Not a bartender, but I'll share this story. A good friend was a cocktail waitress at a casino on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. She lost count of the amount of people that wore diapers so they wouldn't have to get up from the table or slot machine, she said towards the end. She was immune to the urine smell, but seeing a grown man sitting in his own poop because his diaper overflowed broke her, and she quit on the spot. Story 40. Another one. We had a regular who was a substance. He was too drunk to drive, so normally I held on to his keys until his girlfriend showed up. Another guy who also drove a Chevy got into a fight in the parking lot and was trying to flee and hit another car. After we stopped him, I took his keys. The cops got called, and I gave a statement and handed the cop the guy's keys and let him know it was the Chevy Malibu with the SCS. I went back into the bar, my shift now over, and the substances dealer guy said, "Hey, let me have my keys, I gotta go grab something," followed by, "Dog, these ain't my keys." I sprinted to the cop outside as he was clicking the key fob standing next to the Malibu, preparing to search it since the guy in custody was carrying pills. While he's clicking the key fob, the truck, which is parked 2 spots down, is flashing its lights and honking the horn every third click. He was literally turning towards the truck confused, and I was like, "Hey, wrong keys, sorry," as I snatched the truck keys and gave him the car key. He didn't think nothing of it. I went back inside, and dealer guy is pale as a ghost, but I handed him his keys and we split, left the truck there but locked. If the cop had opened dealer's truck, there's no way he wouldn't have smelled substance. I have not hung out with that crowd in over 10 years. Life was wild then. Story 41. Not a bartender, but a liquor store clerk. We had tons of regulars who would come in multiple times a day to get pints, half pints. By the 4th or 5th one, it was usually time to cut them off. We were also strictly not allowed to extend any lines of credit or spot them, as it was state law. One dude was particularly rough and heavy drinking, a regular. One day he came in very obviously fighting the shakes when trying to buy a half pint of Kentucky Deluxe, which was literally like a $2.50 bottle, our cheapest beverage too. He was about 50 cents short, so I apologized and told him no go. Saw him panhandling in front of the nearby gas station about a half hour later on my break and kind of nodded to him as I passed by. As I was walking away, I heard him groan really loud. Turned around and he'd seized out, hit his head on the pavement. Some woman inside the pizza place next door rushed out and started cradling his head with a towel while I called an ambulance. He back in a few days later with some stitches and bought himself a handle of KD. The same dude got robbed because he was always flashing cash whenever he had it, trying to impress the wrong type of people, dealers and other addicts. He somehow would always have a huge wad of $20 early in the month from some kind of welfare he got. Realistically, it wasn't even that much, maybe $600, and most of that would be his rent. Didn't see him for a while because he'd been stabbed several times and cut up really bad. Again, came back and doing the same thing, flashing bankroll and bragging, and buying his handle of cheap booze a month or two later. He's probably dead by now, if I had to guess. Story 42. This happened over 20 years ago, but I still wonder if the guy ever recovered. So I was working at an upscale establishment in a somewhat rural area about an hour west of Toronto. I was on a double shift that day. Typically, lunch was finished around 2:30, and dinner service didn't start until 5, so the restaurant was closed generally for those hours, with a very limited menu if the kitchen felt like serving food at all. The staff would relax, some would go home depending on the day. We had a group of 4 show up quite late for lunch service, and they were ordering expensive bottles of wine, scotch, etc., along with their food. 2 guys kind of lingered and decided they had nothing better to do than continue drinking. I was on the bar for the dinner shift. By around 7:30, I realized they weren't slowing down and looking at their tab talked to management. and said I refused to serve them any more drinks. Management made accommodations as they had run up quite a bill. Not even 20 minutes after another round of port was served, not by me, one of the dudes got up to look for the washroom. He found the brick staircase that led to the lower level and lost his footing. He was found by a staff member bleeding from both ears, unconscious, in a crumbled mess at the bottom of the stairwell. Ambulance and police were called. Everyone on shift had to make statements. There were rumors he was in a coma, induced coma, as well as severe brain damage, WW. He also found out he had left his dog in his car the entire time on a decently warm day. Still bothers me that my call on cutting off service was overridden, and the end result caused serious injury to a guest and trauma to staff. Story 43. Worked at a bar. This lady seemed to know all the employees by name. None of us knew who she was. So one busy Saturday afternoon, she's getting tag-teamed in the men's bathroom, eventually gets kicked out when Manifold Out was going on. Next week, she comes back to introduce her fiancé, who was not one of the tag team. Story 44. Day shift at a college campus bar over 12 years ago. For day shifts, it was usually so slow they'd only staff one bartender until 4 p.m. or so. Guy comes in alone and the bar is nearly empty, so we get to chatting. He seems nice. Then starts getting emotional and opens up to me about how all of his friends and family abandoned him. A few years before, he and his girlfriend were going through a rocky period. They have a pretty big fight one night in front of their friends. Make up. He spends the night at her place. They're intimate in the morning. He leaves for work. He calls her after work to chat as he drives home. He hears a knock at her door, and she says she's going to go answer it. He has a bad feeling. Tells her not to. She answers anyway, and he hears her being attacked and beaten. He calls police, flies the rest of the way to her house. Finds her barely alive. She passed in his arms. Police get there shortly after, and she's declared dead. He's suspect one. His DNA is in her underwear, and all of his friends and family are shocked, saying things like, "We never suspected anything like this could happen," but still believe he did it, and eventually, all stop talking to him. Dude had PTSD from hearing the attack, watching his GF pass, and then being suspected and indicted for her death. Ultimately, I think charges were dismissed, but by then, he was completely alone and totally broke. Crazy story. Who knows how much of it was true, but I still think of him from time to time and hope he's okay. Never saw him again. Story 45. I heard about this story because I was gone that night, helping deliver a litter of 16 piglets. All survived. Picture it, Wisconsin, New Year's Eve, 10 years ago. One of our regulars, Rick, is sitting at the bar drinking beer and mostly keeping to himself. Two guys playing pool get kind of rowdy, try to involve Rick. He wants nothing to do with it, just drink his beer. They rough him and each other up, and in the process, Rick gets hit with a wooden bar stool. Trying to defend himself, Rick pulls out a jackknife and takes a wild defensive swing. Hit one of the guys on the belly, who immediately starts screaming like a pig. "He hit me!" Cops are called. Rick surrenders peacefully. Guy gets taken to the local ER. Guy gets in there, it's a nick, like a paper cut, about as wide as a finger, a single drop of blood. That's it. Docs, who are friends with the bartenders and the owner, say later they barely kept from laughing out of the building. Tape gets reviewed, sees it was self-defense on Rick's part, and he's released. Story 46. Had a regular who was some sort of contractor, clearly had a chip on his shoulder, quick to anger, irrational, slightly more of a drinking problem than most of the day shift crowd. I knew he was married and expecting a child right around Christmas. I'm pretty sure he had 2 other kids already, but can't remember. As the holiday and due date approach, he's getting wilder at the bar. Way too riled up during mundane conversation, trying to force people to take shots they don't want. Stuff that generally disrupts the vibe. We all let it slide because we figured he was freaking out about the baby. This became very off-putting when his bar tabs went from $30 with food to $100 without food. This guy definitely doesn't have that kind of money to burn daily with a baby on the way. He shows up alone at 3 p.m., opening, on Christmas Eve, and slaps $300 on the counter. Tells me he wants to buy everyone's drinks for the day shift, but not to give him credit. He sits there alone all day watching me wave off everyone's cards and tell them it's an anonymous holiday gift. He looks miserable. Eventually the money runs out. He tips me for the tab and leaves. $400. Spent before the sun goes down at a bar where the well drinks were $2.50. Never saw him again. But he didn't die or something. I know that for sure. I really hope it's because he stepped the duck up. I can't imagine being his wife and finding out how much money he spent at the bar one, at Christmas and 2, while she was 8.5 months pregnant. This dude dropped like $1,000 in about a week. Still feel guilty about letting him do it, but I didn't have much of a choice. Story 47? Got a lot of them. Here is a particularly crazy one. I was a nightclub bartender. Towards the end of the night, this girl comes up and orders a drink. She had been there most of the night and conducting herself fine. She orders the drink and doesn't really slur when she does. But when she goes to pay, she starts just digging through her purse and dumping everything on the counter, including her bowl and substance. No sober person would do this, so I took her drink and gave her water. Didn't see her the rest of the night, so I assumed that was the end of it. Then, while we were cleaning the bar later, one of the barbacks comes out and asks for help, because there is a girl who is locked in a stall passed out. Turns out it was the girl who tried to order from me earlier, except now she was naked, fully passed out, and covered in crap and puke. We had to call the paramedics to come get her, who unfortunately had to use a big special stretcher to get her out because we were in a basement and she was a pretty large person. She was fine in the end, but a terrible situation. And someone who apparently had really crafty friends who abandoned her there. Story 48. Regular night at the restaurant. 2 of us behind the bar. Have a guy sit in a booth with a reusable shopping bag. We were in the fancy area of town, mall across the street. He orders an entree and water. I suggested something else, but he said he was on a budget. No worries. Treated him like everyone else. He finished, and I dropped the check. He put down an Amex gift card. It doesn't work. I asked if he remembered to activate it. He said, yes. I asked if he could call and check balance. He said his phone is dead. I call the number. Card hasn't been purchased, so I get my manager. She comps his meal. We tell him to have a good night. We were very polite, did not make a scene, just let it go, but he wanted the card back. He goes down to talk toy GM. The bar is kind of cut off. I start to hear yelling. Then I hear what sounds like a gunshot. Thankfully, it was not, but he shoved my manager into our French door and broke it. The host then jumps him, and our other bartender gets him on the ground restrained. Normally, there is a cop in the shopping center parking lot. None. We call 911. The guy is fighting. They let him up, and he runs off. He was spotted in the parking lot a few days later. Cops were called, and he was arrested. Our GM had cracked ribs and a concussion, but I just remember the sound. It was terrifying. Story 49. This group of what looks like teenagers walk in, celebrating a birthday. Like 20 people rolled in. Most of them freshly 21. Loud, obnoxious. They were sort of a trendy, hipsterish crowd that couldn't decide if they should like Alex G or Charlie XCX. Anyhow, I don't even remember what I was doing, but I hear a commotion and turn towards where this group is sitting, and I will never unsee this. One of the girls is just leaned back projectile pissing into the air across the bar. The image you have in your head is exactly what it looked like. It became known as the pissening. Story 50. I own a bar, so I have a lot of stories to tell, but one that sticks out. I have a customer that spends all day with me every Christmas. I'm talking 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. She's a bitter, angry woman who has lost everyone in her life except her little dog and frequently tells me she will hit herself once the dog passes if she doesn't go first. She's easily 85 and the dog is almost 15, so it'll be a toss-up. I started buying her a Christmas present about 4 years ago, and she spends the rest of the year complaining about how crafty of a gift it is. Sometimes she'll even message the business page on Facebook just to complain knowing I'll respond. A few months ago, she hadn't been in for 3 weeks, and I thought, oh, she or the dog or both are in their trailer pass. So I drive out there, and after a while, she comes to the screen door and tells me to mind my damn business. But before I left, I told her, I'm glad you're both okay, and she almost smiled before slamming the door. I truly hate this woman, but also have an inexplicable need to keep a track of her, and she's one of many. Story 51. About 13 years ago, I was working at a casual waterfront restaurant and bar that closed at 10 p.m. on weekdays. On this particular night, I was the closing bartender, with one server covering the dining area. It had been an unusually slow evening, and by 9 p.m., the place was nearly empty. We were already starting our closing routines. At 9:20 p.m., in walks a 25-person ultimate frisbee team looking for dinner, drinks, the works. What started as a dead shift turned into one of the most memorable nights of my bartending life. This crew could drink, y'all. We ended up letting them stay after locking the doors, and the party really kicked off. They even brought their own shot skis and beer skis. The server and I had joined in the wild rumpus and had a blast. We didn't close up until just after midnight, and not going to lie. The end of the shift was a bit fuzzy. Thank God the owner-manager was cool about it and actually got a kick out of the story. That was hands down the messiest I've ever left the bar after a shift, but absolutely worth it. Also, that group alone racked up $3,000 in sales, and the server and I split an $800 tip. I was on track to walk out with maybe $70 before they showed up. Story 52. Not a bartender, but was a regular at our neighborhood pub for many years. There was another regular, Clay, sweetest guy you've ever met. Never got drunk, though he seemed to be there for a few hours every day. Sweet, gentle, gave lovely advice. We always noticed that some regulars and staff had a weird, sad vibe with him. We figured he was really down on his luck or something anyways. One day, we came in to find that Clay had passed away. Turns out he had needed abdominal surgery for a long time, but the doctors refused to perform it until he got sober. He knew, and apparently told some people there, that he would die eventually without the surgery. Kept putting off kicking the habit. I guess at some point maybe realized he couldn't do it, and just let it happen. The bartender we knew well was really torn up about it and felt like she had personally contributed to his death. She said they all talked all the time about barring him, but worried that he'd just go elsewhere and drive drunk, since this was the only bar walkable. Poor Clay. Rip. He really was a lovely person. Story 53. Used to work behind a bar. One night I had to cut someone off. He wasn't in a good place and had clearly had enough. He kicked off, tried helping himself at the pumps, then made a move to come around the bar. I ended up having to take him down and hold him there until the police arrived. He didn't just fancy a pint. He clearly needed a pint. Very upsetting to see, and I felt awful for him. When the officers turned up, one of them reached for pepper spray, but I had to ask him to put it down. We were both right in the line of it. They took him away. Next day, police came back. I thought they were checking in or wanted a statement, but no. They told me he'd taken his own life once he got to the cell. Didn't know what to do with that. Felt wrong to be told, to be honest. Still think about it. Haven't worked a bar since. Story 50. Another story, when I was managing a bar in West Texas, and this drunk dude refused to move from the spot where the waitresses would pick up their drink order. Asked him nicely 2 or 3 times. Didn't feel like throwing him out myself, so I asked the off-duty cops at the door. They were talking with a plainclothes narcotics officer named Rico, who was a regular and would stop by sometimes. So they said, "Hey, Rico, you want to handle this one?" Rico is maybe 5'7" with boots on, but he's built like a tank. He says, "Yeah," and I point out the guy. He taps the guy's shoulder and the guy shoves him. Guy gets slammed and arrested. Surprise guy had an 8-ball in his jeans pocket and went to jail for substances possession and got criminal trespass warning, so if he ever came back, straight to jail. Story 55. Worked for a while at a Japanese whiskey bar in Texas. One night, there was a man there who was trying to assault a woman. She yelled, and myself and the bouncer, I'll be honest, mostly the bouncer, intervened and broke it up. We kicked him out and told him he was banned. He said he couldn't be banned because he was good friends with the owner. Yada yada. After we got rid of him, we asked the lady if she wanted us to call the cops, etc. And she said no, she just wanted to go home, so we comped her tab. I reported all of this to the managers, etc. A few days later, I was fired, and the owner's friend, the Predator, was unbanned and back at the bar again. Story 56. A guy walked into the Italian restaurant I worked in the end of the shift, around 1 a.m., underdressed, maybe barefoot. It happened 30 years ago. Sat in one of the tables outdoor and was in full good vibes mode. Then started to say that he had a fight with his wife while traveling across my state and decided to leave the car, and she just drove away. He was dressed in pajamas shorts and has no money or documents, but he looked happy AF. The restaurant closed, and we gathering together with the other waiters in the beach hut. That keep opened all night in front of our restaurants to wait for the night bus 2 hours later. The guy still there, talking for some time with us, but then he just isolated himself in a bench near to the road. I lost the bus drinking and talking with a group of friends and just got the first bus around 7 a.m. next morning. When my bus drove always, he's still in the same bench, now looking pretty disturbed, staring to the road, still thinking about it. Story 57. Busy Friday night. Hour-long wait at the front for a table and every seat was taken at the bar. 2 seats were occupied by a local NFL player who had just retired and his buddy. Once someone noticed him, it was on. Person after person went up asking for an autograph. We tried to get people to leave him alone, but it was no use. Eventually, he just got up and left. The other bartender went chasing after him in the parking lot. "Mr. NFL player! Mr. NFL player! You didn't pay your tab!" He turned around and calmly said, "Check under my dinner plate." She went back in, clears his plate, and saw a crisp $100. He left $100 on a $35 tab. Story 58. I was bartending at a busy bar outside of a baseball park. When we closed, everyone had to get out. They could take their drinks with them. But once the lights come on, you can't order anything else, and you can't stay to finish your drink. Security starts ushering people out at that time also. Before security got to this one group to tell them it was time to go, this man came up to me, trying to get another drink. I explained to him that we were closed and I can't serve him anymore. Me, him, and another bartender argued for a few minutes, but I decided it wasn't worth my time and walked away. He picked up a weighted cocktail glass and threw it at me. It hit me in the face, knocked me unconscious, hit my face in multiple places, all over not being allowed to get another cocktail. Story 59. Not weird, but funny. I worked in a pub with a party floor, so there was 1 counter per level. One evening when I was working upstairs, I saw a mixed group of regulars arrive, greeted them, and learned there was a couple among them. As the evening progressed, I noticed that as soon as the woman was dancing with her friends, the man took the opportunity to go dance with another girl and buy her a drink. After 2 hours, one of the girl's friends shows her the ride from afar, and the girl decides to go and calm her anger in the toilet. When she comes back up, the boy has gone smoking, so she takes the opportunity to go see the second girl and explain the situation to her. When he came back, the two gave him a scandal in the middle of the dance floor. I had turned down the music a little, I admit, but I like tea, and the guy left in disgust. The 2 girls ended the evening together, and I learned later that they had obviously been very attracted to. Story 60. Not a bartender, but a regular, and been around for some of these things with bartender friends. I was pretty new to one place and heard this one guy referred to as Nuggets. I understood the name, but didn't have any reason to believe it. One day I went into the bathroom after him, and there was crap everywhere. I basically had to Jean-Claude Van Damme the opposing walls to piss. and then be the one to break the news to the bartender. Guy returned to the bar, sat at his seat, and continued drinking in shorts that must have been covered in crap. Same place, same bartender was serving a couple. I was familiar with the guy, who was a major creep. The last time they were in there, the lady went to the bathroom like 15 times in a half hour. Obvious she was doing. A few days after this visit, she murdered him with multiple stab wounds. I could type an essay explaining a lot about these two, but we'll leave it there. Bartenders, what's your best "I'm cutting you off" story? A little background. Bartending is my weekend job. I am a surgeon professionally, but took up weekend bartending after my divorce. I tend bar in a pub a couple blocks from the hospital I work at, so I often see a lot of the people I work with on the weekend, after they get off their shifts at the hospital. Anyway, this one particular Saturday evening, I notice a small group of nurses that I am good friends with. I are at a table in the far corner of the pub talking together. I hadn't noticed how long they had been there, but it was odd because they usually greet me loudly as they walk in through the door. Anyway, I don't think much of it until I noticed a couple times they are looking over at me. I walk over to them and ask if everything is okay. They all look at this one woman in their group with whom I was not yet familiar. She tells me that she really wanted to talk to me as a surgeon, but had missed me the previous day and didn't want to wait the whole weekend. She apologized profusely, but explained that she had these two brothers who were Siamese twins who were interested in a separation. To be honest, I was relieved. I had thought from the way they were acting that something terrible had. She explained further that one brother had always been for the separation, but the other was very against it, and they didn't know if he was against the idea of separating or if he was afraid of surgery. I told her the best thing to do would be to have them come visit me on Monday. She explained that they were a block away and they could come in to meet me, at least to get warmed up to me. I told her it was okay, as long as it didn't take me away from the bar too much. Anyway, they came in, and I noticed two things. First, they were a bit younger than their sister. She was in her late 30s or early 40s. They were 24, checked ID. Second, the one brother, Tim, looked almost completely normal, even a bit attractive. He seemed to be mostly in control of the body. It was more like his brother was branching off of his hip. His brother, Dominic, was almost underdeveloped, but otherwise seemed mostly normal. They were in sort of an extra-wide wheelchair. I figured I'd just get to know them this one particular night at the bar so they'd feel comfortable coming into the hospital for a full evaluation some other time. I start off offering them each a beer on the house. They both accept, and they each order a Sam Adams. We talk for a while, and they toss back beer after beer. To be honest, I'm mostly surprised at this point how well they hold their alcohol. Everyone at the bar started doing shots, and Dominic and Tim keeping pace. We are all having fun, and I'm not really paying close attention to these two, but I notice they are starting to argue quietly with each other. Bickering, really. I realize they are starting to argue over talking to me about the separation, and I can kind of overhear that Tim is for it, and Dominic is against it. I understand where Tim is coming from. He could have a fairly normal life if they separated, and Dominic would definitely have more freedom, though he would still be confined to a wheelchair. I don't know what to do to make them feel at home and to ease tensions. But before I can say anything, Tim kind of blurts out, "I want the surgery." I can tell he is pretty drunk, and Dominic is too. It gets nasty. Tim seems more desperate to me, whereas Dominic comes across as just jealous that Tim got the better deal as far as body development goes. Dominic yells that Tim is just going to be sad and a failure who can walk upright. Tim yells back that Dominic is just an unwanted tumor, and he hates him. The whole bar is staring, and I really don't know what to do. I say, "Hey guys, come on, let's just have some water and calm down a mo." But I was interrupted when Dominic decided to throw a bowl of peanuts at me. I was so pissed, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "That's it, I'm cutting you off." Story 2. Middle of the afternoon, and this dude comes in, and he looked broken. He ordered a Long Island and obviously needed it. A few Long Islands in, we get talking, and I find out the dude's dad passed away that morning, and he couldn't afford the flight back for the funeral. I buy him his next drink, and as he finishes it, he just looked up at me with that drunken look, and I knew he was done. I said, "Time for a cab ride home, huh?" He just nodded. I called a cab, walked him out, and gave the cabbie $40 to get the guy home safe. Story 3. I used to bartend in the Center City section of Philadelphia. There was this regular hipster customer who wasn't a bad guy overall, but really creeped on women hardcore occasionally. Honestly, I felt bad for the guy. As one week I overheard a female friend of his tell him that she and many other girls think he's creepy as crap. At the time, I didn't know how bad he was, so I sort of felt for the guy. Fast forward a few months. It's a typical Saturday night, and hipster creep is in the house getting piss drunk. Trouble is, he met a female friend of his who was also a semi-regular and was up to creeping. "Well," she complains, and after a warning or two, I tell him it's time to hit the road. As I'm walking him out, he is pleading to stay, and I just keep telling him no. Then I swear, he turned to me and said, "Can I stay if I amaze you?" So he breaks into this magic trick that has him vomiting up cards while I continue to gently yet firmly push his skinny hipster ass out the door. Story 4. I used to bartend at a bar in downtown Boston. This bar was owned by older members of my college fraternity. Thus, if you wore your letters in, you'd certainly get some free drinks. You'd also almost never get cut off except if you were completely ducking blotto. Back during the ALCS playoffs in 04, it's Sox-Yankees, huge ducking rivalry. If you know anything about the Yankees and live in Boston, you know they suck. The bar is packed with mostly Sox fans and a few Yankees fans. David Ortiz hit a walk-off shot. My friend Brian, who was drinking there as I was tending, flips out. He's crap-faced, is screaming so loud that he throws up all over himself, so he decides to just take off all of his clothes. And then he grabs a guy's Yankees hat off his head, puts it on the ground, pops a squat, and craps in it, fully nude, in a crowded bar. He then picked it up and threw it at the guy. I love the kid. He was hilarious, but he had to go that night. Story 5. Not really a crazy story, but this group of guys came in and sat at the bar during a pretty busy Saturday night. I only served them about 2 beers each, but it became pretty apparent after the second beer that they'd been drinking a fair bit before they got there. Just as I'm about to say something, one of the guys gets up from the bar and starts darting to the back for the bathrooms, only to end up vomiting literally the entire way back. He ends up puking on some poor girl's head who was sitting at a table, literally drenching her in vomit. I could not believe the amount of sick that came out of this guy. A few other people got some puke on them as well, but it wasn't anywhere close to as much as that one girl. Chaos ensued as everyone around were nearly sick themselves and demanding refunds on their tabs. Good times. Story 6. Bar in a college town. Fairly crowded, but not a rough place. Guy walked in about 30 minutes before closing, obviously ducked up, bought a beer, and sat down. A few minutes later, I walk back by. And dude has a straw up his nose doing lines off the bar. I immediately yell something along the lines of, "Why the heck are you doing coke on my bar?" To which he responded by looking up and saying, "It's substance." If anyone is interested, I also have stories of push-up guy, curb kiss guy, and toilet halt. Story 7. I tended bar one summer right after I turned 18. Legal to serve, not legal to drink in my. It was a small town bar, so it was never busy. We had a regular Jerry that came in daily. Generally, he'd ride his bike or have his son drive. I was fairly new to the game, but one day he just kept having his drink, a rum and coke, over and over again. I think he had about 6 or 8 and was slurring his words, so I felt guilty and tried to cut him off. He started making a fuss, and my manager just said to let it go and continue serving him. He then told me a story. He was recently diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. He was at the doctor's, and they ran tests to see how long he had to live. With a medication, he had 6 months. Without, he had 3. He was at a point in his life where he just didn't care and wanted to enjoy his drinks in peace with the friends he had made behind the bar. I assumed, aside from his son, he had no one else in his life. I left shortly after to go to college and came back the next summer. I remembered Jerry and asked how he was doing. I found out that 4 months after I left, he had passed away. Story 8. I work in an Irish bar, and on St. Patrick's Day this past year, our owner tells us before the madness starts that it's okay by him to have some drinks today to celebrate, be merry, and deal with the drunks and madness better. I don't think he was thinking straight, but it was a nice gesture. He probably should have set a limit, a low limit. Anyways, one of the bartenders is taking shots with customers while making herself and other customers drinks, and gets pretty darn drunk by 3 p.m. The rest of the staff tries to cut her off. She continues to take shots with customers, and shortly thereafter is to a point where she can barely serve customers. The place is completely packed, and people are asking her for drinks, and she's just making them whatever the heck she wants. Mostly beers, simple well cocktails. Some customers start yelling at her that she's not going to pay for a drink that she didn't order, and the bartender flipped out and started screaming at her, and eventually throws a drink in the customer's face. Right after this, she starts a fist fight with the other bartender who is trying to smooth things over with the wronged customer, and then threatens to stab our server with the drink order receipt spike. The only person our bouncer kicked out that day was our bartender, and she didn't even lose her job because the owner, is dumb, felt it was his fault he allowed her to drink. Story 9. It was late on a Sunday night in the arty part of Seattle when this group of about 10 frat boy types comes down the street and begins straggling in through the doors. The lead 2 are already pretty unsteady and glassy-eyed, so my bartender Stevie just tells them no and go find somewhere else. I'm the bigger guy between the two of us, so I get to stand in the entry in front of the rest of the crowd and explain, convince, cajole them back out the door. They're not happy. A couple aren't having it, but I'm polite and insistent, despite having to look way up to meet some evil eyes. I think Stevie was also volubly threatening to call the cops. So, being drunk a whole frat boys, they decide they've been wronged and are hanging around outside the railing in front of the bar shouting stupid crap. One tries to Gene Kelly the umbrella and bends the aluminum pole it's on, slanting it at 45 degrees. At this point, I'm still standing in the doorway as some of them want to politely discuss why they're not allowed in our fine establishment. And then one of them runs up with a gigantic sex toy. Afterward, Stevie tells me how he earlier saw the dildo arrive on the scene. A local bum was going through the dumpster across the way, pulled this thing out, contemplated it, and tossed it over his shoulder. It's as large enough to clock from 100 feet away. It's veiny, pinky tan flesh-colored, and there is a large black skid mark down the length of it, and someone's waving it around inches from my mouth. He's also saying the stupidest fifth-grade stuff about how I want it, how I'm gonna gag on it, and how I'm A. Really pisses me off. Not I care personally how he thinks I am, but he's talking about lots of my friends and regulars, a stone's throw from actual gay bars. But I'm mostly worried that he's stupid and sloppy enough to actually touch me with it. Surprisingly, he's almost my size. So I start psyching myself up to grab him and throw him out past the railings again. Cooler heads prevail, fortunately for both of us, as his friends call him outside the rail. A couple of them are still into it though and want to get in my face. But a couple of familiar faces come from inside to stand behind me, so they all go across the street. Feeling a little shaky from all that adrenaline, I turn to a tall guy I haven't met before and thank him for backing me up. Then there's a whomp, and the damn dumpster dildo lands at my feet. I've just had it, so I snatch up the dildo and fling it back across the street at them. There's lots of hooting and hollering from over there. I turn around to say something to the tall guy who's kind of smirking about all this. I go for the thanks, brother, high five, and he holds it, looks me in the eye, and says, just play along. That's when he enfolds me in a bro hug and very conspicuously drops his hand down to squeeze my ass, which is pointed back at the frats. They get really uncomfortable, really quiet, and do their best to look elsewhere. Soon they are elsewhere. Tall dude introduces himself as Wes. So for his quick thinking and masterful one-upmanship, Wes always gets a free beer when I'm working. Story 10. A woman came into my bar and held it together well enough to order her drink. Liquor and Coke. Could have been rum. Could have been whiskey. But as soon as she took a sip, we realized we had made a huge mistake. She was clearly on substance, and my guess is prescriptions, because she was neither up not down consistently, but completely incoherent. It was late on a random Sunday night. There were a few regulars, and that was about it. So myself and the waitstaff just stayed right close to her and kept watch. She had paid for her drink already, and we knew she was on foot, so we decided to let her finish her drink before we cut her off. After a few sips, she got real ornery and called me over angrily demanding that I serve her a drink. Confused, since she had half of a cocktail in front of her, I picked her drink up, spun around, and put it back down in front of her. "Thank you," she said with a bite to her tone and took a sip. Not a damn minute later do I hear her getting again that we won't serve her. Same deal, nearly full drink right before her eyes, so I do another pirouette with her cocktail in hand and drop it back in front of her. I must have done this a dozen times, and she never once realized it was the same drink. My only regret is not charring her each time I did it. Eventually, I picked her drink up, walked it to the sink, and dumped it out. I told her she was cut off and had to leave and asked the door guy to walk her out, which enraged her. Story 11. More of a story of when we should have cut someone off. So my brother and I were bartending a wedding. They had the whole ceremony at our location, and they had hired a preacher off Craigslist. Kind of weird, right? Anyways, they have the ceremony and then commence the drinking. Hey, this is Wisconsin. The preacher comes to the bar and gets a Tanqueray and tonic. Normal enough. So we serve a couple more, and then I forget about him. We were kind of busy. The wedding reception was winding down when my brother looks out the window and there's a cop. He tells my boss and he goes out to talk to him. So he doesn't disrupt the reception. Turns out the preacher had left the party and on the way to the next town had rolled his car several times. Apparently he wasn't hurt and someone picked him up before the cops came and he evaded the DUI. The only way the cop knew where to come to inquire was they found the marriage license in the preacher's wrecked vehicle. My boss came back inside and looked at the Tanqueray bottle. Then he asked my brother how full it was when we started. He said it was full. There was left in the bottle. He drank half of a bottle of Tanqueray gin, and then drove off. Turns out my brother served him a few too many. He has problems telling people no, apparently. Story 12. Okay, in my town, there's an ICP-themed tattoo parlor with matching staff. One night, one of their guys was celebrating his second anniversary at our shop. This guy was huge. 6'6" to 6'8", easy. All night, he's having kamikazes, not as strong as the name would imply, and vodka crank. He's getting a little drunk, but I make sure that his friends are getting him home, and at his size, the guy ought to be able to drain a distillery's worth of girl drink. Fast forward to 5 till close, and this kid is pie-eyed, but in a good mood. We let him know it's time to mosey, and they thank payout, tip well, and thank us for our serve. Groovy. About 20 minutes later, we get a knock on the door from this guy and his friends asking for one more round. Without unlocking the door, we politely tell him that we're closed. It's illegal, and it's time to boogie. Much through the door, arguing ensues, and we tell them, if they don't leave, we'll call the cops, at which point they all cheer and more arguing ensues. When we inform him that we've called the cops, we hear him shout, "That's fine. They'll go to jail with me." We then hear his other friends bolt rapidly. Now it's just him. He's pissed. At first, we hear him tossing around our 400 pounds picnic tables like so much Lincoln logs. Then he turns his attention to the front door. He ends up pulling so hard that it was unrecognizable and the hinges were about to give. Another bartender. Our bouncer, a late guest, and myself were all on the other side with bottles and pool cues, waiting for the inevitable when everything goes silent. A minute or so later, we hear a knock at the door. Police. We step out to our thoroughly destroyed patio and see him struggling in the squad car. Yeah, when I approached, he walked at me with fists clenched. Warned him twice, had to taste the dumb idiot. I don't normally go in for that sort of thing, but when you're asking for it, you're asking for it. Story 13. Worked in a bus student bar for 3.5 years. I have any amount of ridiculous stories about that place. So I'm working there on a particularly busy night. It was Arthur Guinness Day. Very popular, very messy, very made-up celebration day in Ireland. This guy lands up at the bar. The first thing I notice is how hot his girlfriend is. She's remarkable. I can tell immediately both of them are pretty steamed. In a completely ignorant way, he just yells, "Hey, you two Jagger bombs there, like a good man." She shakes her head and says, "Just get me a water, I'm not drinking anymore." Sensibly. From there, the guy freaks out at her, saying she's ridiculous, useless, and blah, blah. I ignore him and give her a big glass of water. She's sitting there nursing it while he starts insulting her, getting in her ear and saying God knows what. He tried to order another drink for himself off me, and I told him to chill out for a while and to stop mouthing at the girl, or I'd cut him off. In behind the bar, I point him out to my fellow bartenders and tell them he was being a clown and not to serve him any longer. He disappears, and I continue serving the rest of the inebriated masses. About an hour or so later, it's 20 minutes past last orders. The bar staff are hovering around cleaning, collecting, etc. I'm behind my section of the bar, restocking it. The guy reappears and demands I give him a double vodka and Red Bull or something, yelling about he can get a ducking drink in this crap hole. With a face like a bulldog who has just licked piss off a nettle, he storms up to the back part of the bar. Eventually, I finish up and head up to the back of the bar to wipe tables. Sure enough, he's up there roaring drunk, choking his girlfriend. She has tears in her eyes and is trying to yell. I ran over and pulled him off her, and she starts coughing like crazy. He takes a drunken lunge at me and says for me to mind my own business. She's in hysterics now and moves to a different part of the bar with a couple of other girls who were nearby. I told him to leave immediately, or he'd regret it. He's a lot bigger than me. He moves towards me and says, "Who's going to make me leave you and who else?" I just thought, damn this. I circled around to the front door of the bar and grabbed the two biggest bouncers out there and explained what happened. They obviously take stuff like that very seriously. They bolt up to the back and chuck him out into the smoking area. I close the door and let them at him. We're closing the place then after all the customers have left, and I asked the head bouncer what happened. The guy picked up a bottle and tried to take the two bouncers. They caught him and roughed him up. On my way home, I saw him alone, battered and bruised in the taxi office nearby, crying. What a crap head. Story 14. So I used to be a supervisor in a student union bar in London, and I have some pretty messed up stories. One of my favorites is the story of the football team's naked adventures. I don't know the situation in the States, but most English unis give their students Wednesday afternoons off for sports and clubs. This is usually followed by copious drinking in the union and is called sports night. So it was a reasonably quiet sports night about 3 years ago. The football team were the only team drinking, so I thought I had the situation under control. They were getting completely rat-arsed while making each other perform bizarre and humiliating rituals involving alcopops. Typical sports team stuff. I was sitting in the office, as there wasn't much to do, when suddenly the fire alarm went off. This wasn't too unusual. The sports teams thought it was hilariously funny and happened about once a month. I sighed and began closing down the bar so that the football team wouldn't try to sneak back in and raid the place, so I had my back turned while the bouncers ushered everyone out. When I was finished, I headed down the back stairs towards the fire assembly point, a yard out the back with a deep pit along one side to let light into the basement of the physics building. All the was down the stairs, I found an assortment of men's clothes, but didn't think too much of it. It was a Wednesday after all. Once I got outside, the first thing I noticed was a distinct lack of football team. This pissed me off more than anything else since I was pretty sure they were the ones who set the alarm off. While waiting for the fire brigade to show up, I rolled a cigarette and leaned back on the railings around that pit I mentioned. My favorite bouncer, a real hard man who loved nothing more than torturing students, we will call him Steve, approached me with a huge grin on his face and told me not to look down. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I looked into the trench below me and saw a sight that will stay with me until I die. The football team was down there. The captain was standing, WKD in hand, yelling instructions at the rest of the team, who were all crammed into a large cardboard box at the bottom of the trench. None of them had any clothes on. They were not allowed back in the building based on our strict dress code of, you have to be wearing clothes. I had a much more peaceful night after that, although I have no idea what happened to the football team. Story 15. I'm not a bartender, but before I graduated from college, I booked concerts at local bars. I was sitting at a table on my own, and a male and female who could have been the poster children for throwing your life away sit down next to me. Dude's drunk to the point that he is mouthy and is in and out of consciousness. His female counterpart can't say anything unless it's so loud that the entirety of this tiny biker bar can hear her. She's rambling on about how she wanted to try and take these two girls across the bar home with them for encounters and how she was dancing to the jukebox and jamming out with her clam out when the bands played. Mind you, I invited absolutely none of this and was stuck sitting on an inside seat with no reasonable way to escape this mess. I see the terrible humor in this and begin recording with my phone so my friends would believe the story later. So this lady's still rambling and yelling, and her boyfriend, male counterpart, goes out of consciousness and isn't waking up. I'm not sure at this point if he's passed out or just died right there in the chair. She's yelling at him, screaming his name and telling him to wake up, and at one point starts calling him Big Daddy. Dude's not moving. She tells us this is the second time he's passed out in a bar today, and that it happened earlier in the day at another bar. All of a sudden, she grabs her car keys and runs outside, and before anyone can stop her, she's in her car. Not good. This lady is in no shape to be trying to drive. Police pull her over literally 300 feet from where she was parked, and there's no doubt she went to jail. While she's pulled over, Big Daddy wakes up and is completely out of it. A guy sitting nearby decides this guy needs to go and needs to leave the bar, and I agree. But I'm not about to drag this guy outside, because the last thing I wanted to do was grab this guy to take him out and have him go ape crap and take a swing at me. Sounds like a big ol' nope. The owner of the bar, a burly biker dude with a Z's top beard, also decides this dude needs to go. He grabs this guy from behind, lifts him up out of his chair, and drags him out like a fireman dragging someone from a burning building. He quite literally throws this guy out on the sidewalk and blocks the doorway until he leaves. All is well again. Story 16. I was a bouncer at a dive bar for like 3 years. One night we were having a wake for this regular who had died, and this guy comes in. Relatively nice guy. T-shirt, shorts, flip-flops. He bellies up to the bar, sits down and has a drink. Engages in the usual bar chit-chat. Then like a half hour to an hour goes by and the guy is duck and gone. I mean really gone. He had to have been on something. That's how gone he was to go from drinking a beer to totally belligerent. He starts drinking empties at the bar. Really obvious ones too, with cigarette butts in them. At that point I get up and say, "It's time to go, buddy." He goes, okay. And then he grabs a big stack of tips on the bar that some lady put down for the bartender. I have to wrestle this guy down to the ground, and one of the friends of the guy getting waked comes over and starts trying to beat the crap out of this guy for ducking up his friend's memorial. So I get the drunk guy out the door to save him from an ass whooping. He walks outside and punches this biker in the face on his way out. The biker is totally pissed off and ready to go grab a gun from his Harley. The owner is trying to calm him down. The guy kicks an iron fence and loses a flip-flop as he stumbles away. I go back inside and I realize throughout the chaos, the guy still has all the tips from the bar. I go outside and the grill cook, being the passionate man that all good chefs are, comes with me. This guy got maybe a block or so, stumbling with just his one flip-flop on, and the dialogue goes like this. Me: "Hey man, you need to give us that money back. It's not yours, guy. What money? What are you talking about?" M: "The tips you stole from the bar that aren't yours." G: "I don't have nothing, man. Look." Turns pockets inside out. Money falls out on sidewalk. G: "See, I've got nothing." Takes shirt off. G: pulls down shorts. G: pulls down underwear. So there's this guy, standing there naked at 1 a.m., legs spread apart, arms in the air, showing us that he has nothing, even though the money is laying right on the ground. I pick up the money and walk away. As we walk away, the guy starts talking crap to us. The cook wants to fight him. I put my hand on the cook's shoulder and say to him, "Dude, you're about to fight a naked man. Don't go out like that." He laughs and we walk back to the bar. Story 17. 10 a.m. on a Thursday. Myself, the manager, and a very normal-looking, middle-aged, middle-class woman are the only people in the bar. She's having a couple pints of beer and playing slot machine. She has made 5 trips to the bar, buying a beer and withdrawing large amounts of money each time. We decide she has had enough and cut her off, refusing to give her any more beer or money. Result: a pint glass whipped at me and a tirade about how I'm stealing her money by not allowing her to win it back. We manage to kick her out and watch as she accosts every person walking down the street and regales them with unsolicited tales of our crooked thievery. Story 18. I work as a bouncer and a bartender, depending on the night at a college bar. It was March, right when the weather in Colorado pretends it's going to stay warm for a spell. And I'm enjoying one of the first bouncing shifts of the year where my balls haven't frozen off. Cute girl who used the advantageous weather to show off her wonderful legs in a short skirt and cowboy boots stumbling out of the bar. Clearly, she is unfit to return to active drinking duty. She smokes a cigarette, or at least attempts to, eventually having the butt fall out of her mouth. She ineffectually gathers herself for the return trip inside. "I'm sorry, hun, but I can't let you back in." I take the nice guy approach first, holding my arm out so she can't stumble her way back in. But why all my friends are in there? The sentence stole what little sobriety she had left, and she falls into me. This is a perfect example of why you need to call it a night. Yet logic has no sway here. with her arms around my neck, looking up at me with beautiful hazel eyes. She goes for the Hail Mary and tells me in a stunning moment of clarity, considering the display she put on over the last 5 minutes. "If you don't let me in, I'm going to piss myself." I didn't believe her and was about to tell her so, until I felt a warm spot develop on my leg she had partially straddling in her attempt to stave off gravity. Quickly, I push her away as she channels her inner Woody and screams, "Damn. Now I have piss in my boots." A good friend watched this tableau of impairment unfold and immediately went inside to tell my coworkers. This turned me into the easiest target for golden shower jokes for months. My favorite part, she didn't come back for 2 months, apparently wanting to show her parents on graduation night her bar. Not wanting to miss a golden opportunity, I greet her and say, "How's it going? I don't think I've seen you since you pissed yourself back in March." Her face pales, and I book it before I hear her parents' response to my statement, laughing the entire way. Story 19. Typical Saturday at work, training a new staff member. One particular patron is making it his mission to down as many Jaeger bombs as possible. He was with a big group of people, including his stepdad, and a rather friendly, polite guy with only one arm. The new girl and I are watching him, and I think to myself, he has had at least 4 Jaeger bombs from my bar, as well as numerous others from the other bars in the hotel. I turn to the new girl and say, "We probably better cut him off." Having said that he didn't appear super drink, but I thought is better set an example for the newbie. So Jaeger Bro saunters up to the bar. He was rather alpha looking. Muscles, backwards cap, you get the idea. And orders, "1 Jaeger bomb, please." The new girl look at each other, thinking about how we are going to break the news, when one of our larger security guards walks up and says something like, "Come on, mate, that's enough." To which Jaegerbro retorts, "Duck off," and turns back to me like nothing happened. The guard rolls his eyes and puts his hand on Jaegerbro's shoulder to escort him out. Jaegerbro flips his shot and starts screaming, "Damn touch me, damn touch me," while flailing his arms around trying to escape, strike the guard. The way he flipping out makes me think alcohol wasn't the only thing in his system. While this is happening, then makes of his group rush over to try and calm him down, which included the one-arm guy grabbing him by the shirt and swinging him halfway across the room, which was amazing to watch. Jaegerbro was a big guy. One arm weighed about a buck of 5 and flung him around like a rag doll. It took about 8 people to wrestle him outside, a mix of guards and the guy's family. Unfortunately, in the confusion, Jaegerbro takes a wild swing and knocks out his stepdad, who was, for lack of a better word, a fatars, hits the ground like a sack of potatoes. Was quite a spectacle. New girl didn't find it as funny as me. Story 20. I played a regular Saturday spot at a pub with my band. Old school, rock and roll, top 40s kind of band. There was a private party going on that night, some family birthday celebration or something with a combined packs of 50. They had their own band prior on stage playing really amateurish sounding tunes, but they were young and we were actually supportive of them, cheering, clapping, and encouraging them after they were done. So after their set was done, 40 of the party guests stayed back. We went on stage to set up and sound check, a process that'd take between 30 minutes. Note that this was at 9 p.m., and we weren't slated to start till 9:45 p.m. Halfway through our sound check, one of the prior band guy's dad came up to my singer and asked him why he was insulting his son's band by sound checking. We spent a good 5 minutes telling him that, no, we're not. We had to sound check because all bands are different. He wasn't having any of it and started shouting and screaming. Cue my violinist. One of the most petite and sweetest girls I've met, who is also really scared. She grabbed her bow, charged up to him, and basically told him to have intercourse with his mother and to hump himself out of the pub. This didn't sit well with the previous band, who were also slightly drunk. Note that these guys were young, probably 18, 19 or so. They started getting up in our faces, along with some other equally drunk family members. Things got really heated up, and we were trying to defuse the situation. We managed to get them to sit down and offered to have drinks with them, until some random skinny kid decided to charge at me. I'm not a big-sized guy, 178 centimeters, 72 kilograms, but I do hit the gym regularly for weights and kickboxing classes, so I'm decently built. I grabbed the boom arm from my cymbal stand, longish metal tube, and went right at him. Got held back by my bandmate, and he got physically dragged off by one of the regulars at the pub. Note that this pub had no bouncers, but the bartenders were decent-sized and looked scary. They bounced the entire party out and told them in no uncertain terms that since their party was over and they were stirring crap with the band, they could leave and should not return ever. Story 21. I had a regular in one night. 30-year-old guy only drank beer. Around midnight, he switched to whiskey and got crazy creepy. He kept asking girls if they liked to duck. I told him that he's had enough and should probably go home. I believe he lives 2 or 3 blocks away. He agreed and headed for the door until a drunk chick saw him, grabbed him, and started making out with him. They leave, and 30 minutes later, they both come back. She goes to the bathroom, and he tells me they just had sex. I thanked him for bringing her back, but tell him I'm still not serving him. Around this time, the girl's sister walks in looking for her sister and wanting a drink. Clearly overserved, I tell her that she's in the bathroom, but I can't give her a drink if she can't pronounce her drink. I saw her go to the bathroom, but never saw her again. After I closed for the night and was leaving, I saw her in her car, having sex with the guy who just slept with her sister. Story 22? This one always stands out. My first bartending job was at a small dive in a moderate-sized college town. This was a pretty nice little bar, clean, mostly regulars during the week, and a relatively quiet college group on the weekends. Part of the reason this bar was so quiet was due to our weekend doorman, Joe. A lot of bars have big guys as bouncers. That's generally one of the prerequisites for the job. However, Joe was by far the largest man I've ever seen, about 6 feet 8 inches, over 300 pounds. He was also a serious powerlifter, as in he had competed at Tark's strongman competitions and had been on ESPN several times competing. We're talking about the guys who throw kegs over a 10-foot bar. He was well known in the area, and no one caused problems at our bar. However, one night, a couple of families, parents, kids, come in together. The kids were all over 21, so parents were probably mid-50s. The mom of one of these guys is wearing about 5 in heels and is drunk off her ass. I tell them I can't serve her, as she's falling even while holding onto the table. Surprisingly, they're okay with this. Get a couple of drinks for the younger guys and start playing pool in the back. However, the mom apparently thinks that the son of the other family has intentionally ignored her demands for a Shivan and Shevin and pushes him. His mom gets in her face and pushes drunk Stilly to mom, who promptly falls on her ass. Drunk still to mom's son punches other mom, and next thing you know, we have the Montagues and Capulets at each other's throats in the back. The two sons start going at it pretty hard until Joe walks back. Everything kind of stops when Joe shows up. He grabs both the guys, one in each hand, and lifts them straight over his head, tells them they need to leave. And if they don't, he'll toss their asses out. Luckily, drunk still to mom is pretty much out for the count, and they slowly shuffle outside. Story 23. This one night, slow enough for me to send home all but one waitress, 2 guys come in. I can tell they had both been drinking, but they didn't seem like they were too drunk. One of the guys asks for a beer, and I ask the other what he would like to drink. He yells at me, "What the heck, Jay, do you think I want, mother ducker? Give me a damn beer." I turn to his more sober friend and tell him that he is the only one getting a drink from me because I don't have to put up with the holes. His drunk friend goes apecrap and starts yelling at me about how he's going to kick my ass, even tries to swing at me from the other side of the bar. At that point, I decide that I'm not going to serve either one and ask them to leave. The angry one gets even more upset, almost as if he was surprised he was being asked to leave. He then starts threatening to beat me, yelling, "Emma, take care of you, mother ducker!" I pulled out my phone and pretended I was calling the cops and told him that police were on their way. Saw them cross the street and try to go to another bar only to be refused service there as well. Story 24. Not a cutoff story, but kind of relevant. I used to manage a bar in an airport. I've got a ton of stories about kids trying to trick the bartenders or bachelor parties getting an early start. One story in particular always sticks out to me, though. It was a late Wednesday night and the last flights were boarding. I get a call saying the bartender needed me ASAP. I get down there to find out this guy's card got declined on a $80 tab and had no cash. After talking to him, he knew he didn't have the money and tried to screw us over. I wouldn't let him leave without speaking to airport police and filing a report, shoplifting technically, and he missed his flight. Then he started with the curse words at all the airport employees and throwing things around. That got him arrested pretty quickly. I do kind of bad for making him miss his flight, but he did try to steal a ton of drinks from me. Story 25. I had a woman come into my bar already completely hammered. She went through a cigarette before she approached me and was lighting up a second. She wanted to order a glass of white wine. That's when I noticed she was about 8 months pregnant. A few months later, I had a very obviously pregnant customer come in finishing a cig and lighting up another. She told me she was just in for a couple of hours because her procedure to induce labor had been postponed. Story 26. This guy came up to me and all he said was beer, and so I asked him what kind he would like. He follows up with PBR, so I give it to him. About 20 minutes later, he comes up to me again, and once again, just says, beer. I'm questioning his state of mind at the moment, but decide I'll give him one more. Again, I ask him what kind, and this time he yells, beer! And throws a Starbucks gift card at me in an attempt to pay for the beer. At that point, I was like, hey, you're done. Sorry, guy. He yelled beer at me like 3 more times before the bouncers had to make him leave. Poor guy just really wanted some beer. Story 27. I was a barback in Boston a few years back and noticed a guy walking through the swinging doors to the kitchen. I figured he was hammered and looking for the bathroom, so I followed him. There were 2 bars at this place and the kitchen served both of them, so he had found his way out the other side by the time I got there. I walk into the kitchen, which at 1 a.m. had been closed sometime, and couldn't help but laugh at what I saw. The salad bar had been ravaged. The guy had ripped open the saran wrap on our Cobb salad station, and there was bacon and eggs everywhere. I rush out the other entrance to see the guy shuffling back to his seat and notice a wet spot on his ass. At first, I thought he messed himself, But as I got closer, I noticed something sticking out of his pocket. The guy had grabbed a wad of bacon and shoved it in his back pocket, and the wet spot was just a giant grease stain. Obviously, the damage actually done here was minimal, so I was in a great mood this whole time. I follow him back to his seat, tap him on the shoulder, and tell him he has to leave. He didn't know I followed him, so he was completely surprised. I told him I saw him stealing food from the kitchen, a charge that he promptly denied. So I immediately reached around and grabbed the 2 strips of bacon that were sticking out of his back pocket and asked him where it had come from. His response? Drunken accent. Funny story about the bacon. Story 28. 1. Guy comes in by himself, somewhat regularly, dressed pretty nicely, hat like it's the 50s, nice scarf, leather gloves. Always seemed kind of strange though. One day he comes in at like 5 p.m., orders and drinks a beer at regular pace. He then orders a burger and another beer. In the time it takes for his burger to cook, he has fallen asleep on the bar top and starts sliding out of his chair. He wakes back up when his food arrived. We have taken away his beer, and he doesn't even notice. He's so out of it that he starts using his eyeglasses like a spoon and eats his burger. We had to call the cops to have him removed because he was so ducked up. We figured he was mixing meds with alcohol based on how quick his switch flipped. 2. Different place. These 2 a-holes come in once a week, same day every week. They are greasy, scummy, gits. Only one girl would actually serve them because she didn't mind their harassment, and they tipped her really well. After they finished dinner one night, they come sit at my bar. One guy falls asleep after about half his drink, and the other guy is just staring off into space. A few minutes go by, and the awake guy tries to order his friend another drink, to which I tell him that I can't, and I have to take the drink he has away now. Illinois is super strict about liquor procedures, and this is a higher-end establishment. The guy chews me out, saying, "He's worked hard all day. He deserves to have another drink." Suffice it to say, he did not receive another one, and it was time for them to go. They still go in there every week and do the same thing. I would love to tell them what pieces of crap they are. Story 29. I'm a server at a restaurant where a lot of people will come to celebrate. I was serving a large party, about 16 people, and this one guy was getting a bit out of hand. Whatever, they were almost done. So I wasn't expecting him to order anything else. Our protocol is to ask how a drunk individual is getting home and inform the manager. I told the manager, and while I was handing out the bills, I asked the guy discreetly how he was planning on getting home. To his whole party, he said he was driving the bus for everyone. Then I gave him a look and said, "Sure you are." If he just said that and ended there, I'd have no problem. But when I asked him for a serious answer, he would not give it to me. He kept carrying on with the driving the bus thing. After 10 minutes and asking him several times for a serious answer, I was getting pissed off. And so I told him that we'd be watching him leave, so he better not get into the driver's seat. This is actually true, but we're very discreet and professional about it. By this point, everyone was up getting ready to leave. The guy goes up to my manager and asks why he was getting escorted out of the restaurant. I never said he was getting escorted. The manager asked me later what happened, and I told him the story. The manager was cool, but said to grab him next time if someone is getting out of hand. Lesson from this story: please don't joke about drinking and driving. Or at least give me a serious answer first if you want to joke around about it. I can lose my job if you go out and hit someone, and the restaurant bar can lose their liquor license if you hit someone. Story 30. So I was working my Monday day shift. This lady stumbles into the bar at 3 p.m. I say, "Hey, how are you?" She responds by yelling, "Who the duck are you?" I get her a beer, but she's already so drunk every time she comes to order a beer. I push the same one she's been sipping on. She doesn't realize it's the same beer or that all her shots are just juice. The regulars told me to be careful about cutting her off and getting her to leave, because she's gotten violent with the bartender. She kept coming over to hug me and tell me how beautiful I am and ask me, "What the heck are you?" I had to explain to her I couldn't serve her drinks anymore because I could get in a lot of trouble. She ended up being cool with me, but went off on her roommate. He took her home after an hour.